This is the Samsung Galaxy Z Flip6 smartphone. It's the latest foldable offering from Samsung, and you know what? Something finally happened. Let's talk about it. What's up, internet? I'm Brian McDuff, aka BMac, and welcome to another video. So yes indeed, today we're taking a look at this baby right here, the Samsung Galaxy Z Flip6 smartphone, and whether or not it's more than just your typical modern day flip phone. So without delaying, let's just get right into it here, starting things out with the design of the Samsung Galaxy Z Flip6 and how things are looking on the outside. At a quick glance, you're probably gonna see that the Z Flip6 looks pretty darn similar to the Z Flip5, but there are some key differences. At its core, you still do get a smartphone that literally flips down into a pocketable square form factor with an outer display and an inner display, with still your protruding camera lenses on the outside display and your volume rocker and power button with a fingerprint scanner on the right side of the device. But the biggest difference you're gonna see here just by glancing at this device is of course the now matte finish on the back side and around the sides, with even more squared off edges than we had before. These are actually tougher here too, with the outer glass on the Flip6 being made out of Gorilla Glass Victus and a new Armor aluminum frame that Samsung is actually promising to be more enhanced and therefore, we could assume, stronger. You are also getting dust protection here with a new IP48 dust and water protection rating as opposed to just the IPX8 resistance rating we had before with the Z Flip5, which means you are going to be more likely to keep dust out of that hinge mechanism here, allowing the whole flipping of the Z Flip6 to operate more smoothly and of course, with more durability. You are also getting a variety of different colors to choose from with the Z Flip6 this year, those colors being yellow, mint, silver shadow, and blue, with crafted black, peach, and white available as online exclusives. All of which I think look great. Personally, I have the silver shadow color here, but that online exclusive black color, ooh, that thing looks mint. Well, it doesn't actually look mint, because mint's an actual color this year. Figuratively, it looks mint. And all in all, for the Z Flip6 design, I gotta say here that I'm a fan. I love the form factor, I love the squared off edges, the matte sides. There's so much about the design this year with the Z Flip6 that I'm a fan of. Realistically, the only thing that I change here, aside from the display, which we'll talk about a little bit later, has to be for Samsung to figure out some kind of way to more easily open the device one-handed. But with such an integral part of the Z Flip6 experience being the outer and inner displays, let's talk about them here and how they're looking when you're actually looking at them. The displays on the Z Flip6 have largely remained the same, but with some key upgrades. The outer display is still a 60Hz 3.4-inch Super AMOLED display that extends out almost to the edge, but with a slight and gradual cutout for those protruding camera lenses. It's also capable of up to 1600 nits of peak brightness and clocks in at just over a 300 ppi pixel density rating, both of which contribute to a very beautiful outer display that gets bright enough and is easy enough to use, even in direct sunlight. The Z Flip6 comes with an inner display that you can access, of course, just by flipping up the device itself, which at that point becomes more like a regular smartphone. With that inner display this year being the same 120Hz, 6.7-inch Full HD AMOLED variable refresh rate display like we had last year, but this time with a rather big uptick in brightness performance, with it actually being able to top out at an impressive 2600 nits of peak brightness, which of course is going to make the inner display completely usable, even outside, again, in direct sunlight. You are also getting HDR10 plus HDR support here for the inner display, which of course I'm happy about, but not all content is readily available in HDR10 plus, so if I had it my way, I'd actually prefer to have Dolby Vision HDR support, maybe in addition to HDR10 plus, but in the very least, I'm at least happy to see HDR10 plus support here, because we get that. All in all, going from the outer display to the inner display or vice versa, both displays are vibrant, beautiful, fun to look at, fast, responsive, so there's not a whole heck of a lot I change here as it relates to the overall displays. But one major area of upgrades this year with the Z Flip6 does have to do with the camera system and how the photos and videos will end up looking when taken on this new Samsung foldable. The Z Flip6 is offering a total of 3 cameras, an upgraded 50 megapixel f1.8 wide lens, a 12 megapixel f2.2 ultra wide lens, and a 10 megapixel f2.2 selfie lens cut out from the main inner display. And that improved 50 megapixel main lens this year also offers optical image stabilization and 4K 60 frames per second video with HDR capabilities. So no telephoto lens here on the Z Flip 6, which in and of itself isn't necessarily surprising here, but luckily we do get that 50 megapixel main lens, which is going to be able to be used effectively with a 2x zoom without any noticeable drop in quality. Personally, I'm probably always just going to prefer dedicated tele lenses on smartphones, simply just because they provide better overall optical quality. But here with that 50 megapixel main lens that we're getting on the Z Flip 6, this is an awesome compromise being offered from Samsung. And with all those tech specs in mind, I gotta say, photos look pretty darn great when taken on the Z Flip 6. I don't really see any overly aggressive sharpening here like I sometimes expected of Samsung photos in the past. The colors pop, the bokeh is natural and impressive on those shots where the subject's closer to the camera, and the overall dynamic range seems to be pretty impressively balanced. Things overall look just a little bit more natural with the Z Flip 6 photos here this year, and there's a pretty good chance you'll end up loving the photos that you take with it. But per usual, a lot of what's fueling all these features and capabilities is directly in part because of the performance of the Samsung Galaxy Z Flip 6 and the processing power that this baby is capable of. The Z Flip 6 features the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 processing chipset with an upgraded 4 more gigs of RAM this year, now totaling 12, giving the Flip 6 a lot of power to work with. There are only 2 storage configurations to choose from, either 256 gigs or 512 gigs. I would have liked to see 1 terabyte as an option like we have on the Z Fold 6, but unfortunately only 2, and at least we do have 512 gigs on the table. You're getting audio codec support for SBC, AAC, aptX, LDAC, and of course SSC, which I love to see. The more audio codec support we have, the better. And the Flip 6 covers all the major ones on my list, especially with LDAC. And in my testing, the Flip 6 performs remarkably well, no matter what I'm putting it through. And I guess this isn't really surprising because that Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 processor is pretty much a beast of all beasts as it relates to modern day Android processors available right now. So it's putting in the work clearly. Whether you're video gaming, video editing, photo editing, you name it, I've simply found the Z Flip 6 to be about as smooth, as fast, and as responsive as I'd personally want it to be, and I'm happy with the power and performance that is packing. And we can't forget about the actual functional performance of the Z Flip 6 as it relates to this folding functionality in your everyday life. One of my personal favorite features of the Z Flip 6 has to be this basically desktop mode, which I think is actually called flex mode. If you were to actually fold down the Z Flip 6 at about a 90-degree angle and you already have an app that is launched, you're gonna see the little flex mode icon pop up on the bottom left of the display that allows you to click it, immediately push the app up to the top half of the display, which will then on the lower half bring up a touchpad, a sidebar, and even a little tool panel. And even though I think some of the main uses of the outer display is simply to be able to use it as a quick reference point for checking the time, notifications, interacting with some widgets, or even using it obviously to frame up some of your camera shots, I am still a little bummed that you're pretty limited with how you can actually use this display right out of the box. At the time of making this video, by default, there are only like 4 apps that are natively supported to be used on the outer display. You can of course add as many widgets as you want, but widgets still are only widgets, and there are ways around this by installing a launching app, for example, that'll be like a giant widget that'll launch other apps within it. But you'd think that Samsung would just enable this right out of the box to take full advantage of this outer display. But all in all, I gotta say, I'm very happy and even somewhat impressed with what Samsung has done here with the Z Flip 6 as it relates to it being a thin, foldable phone packing all the power that it has. There's pretty much no doubt that it'll be able to hang no matter what you want to put it through. So kudos to Samsung for pulling off this performance power. But speaking of all that performance, how long could you actually expect this smartphone to last for? What's the battery life like on the Samsung Galaxy Z Flip 6? The Z Flip 6 is packing a 4,000 milliampere hour battery this year, which is a very slight increase over last year's model. And in my testing and in my experience, you could probably expect to get around 6 hours of screen on time, of course, give or take a little bit. With the Z Flip 6 able to charge hardwired at 25 watts, enabling it to charge from 0 to 50% in just around 30 minutes, plus support for up to 15 watts of wireless charging, and 4.5 watts of reverse wireless charging. I'm personally pretty darn happy with the battery life performance of the Z Flip 6, and actually even a little bit impressed. I don't think I was expecting it to be quite as good as it is. Between the Snapdragon 8 Generation 3 processor for better efficiency and that slightly larger 4,000 milliampere hour battery, I think things have been improved and are very solid this year as it relates to battery life. So this thing's gonna last you pretty much all day without any kind of issue. But with all this having been said, here are my final thoughts on the Samsung Galaxy Z Flip 6 smartphone and whether or not I think it's a foldable worth flipping out over this year. Let's just be honest for a second here. I've been pretty vocal with how proud I am of Samsung for evolving their foldable line into what it is today. These things have come a long way, I think, from their somewhat more humble beginnings. But now I think it's safe to say, it's finally happened. We're at a place where these foldables are not just foldables anymore. They're actually pretty helpful in our daily life and come with their own utilization factor. From the folding action of the Z Flip6 acting as pretty much its own stand for photo taking, to performing almost as like a little mini computer when it's in that flex mode, to being just so darn fun to fold down and put into your pocket or take out of your pocket and then expand. It's just such a fun but yet powerful and helpful little device that I think you're probably gonna end up loving. With the power, the cameras, the battery, and the overall design of the Z Flip6, I gotta give credit where credit is due here. I'm really loving this device. And I think it's finally become a smartphone I could actually seriously recommend to someone based on their needs, aside from just being able to tell them that it's cool. If you're interested in seeing the latest deals, prices, promos, and information for the Samsung Galaxy Z Flip6, you can of course always head to my affiliate link, bmac.link/zflip6, or of course as always, there's gonna be clickable links in the video description box below as well, so check those out. But now that this video is filmed, like I said, I'm not much of a selfie taker, but with how cool and fun it is to do here on the Z Flip6, maybe things are gonna change a little bit. I will see you guys in my next video.